Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, September 27th, 2018. Time for the big hearings. They begin at 10 a.m. The hearings in the Senate Judiciary Committee testifying today. Current D.C. Circuit Court Judge Brett Kavanaugh, or Bart O'Kavanaugh, if you prefer, and Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, of course, the first accuser to come forward. Now there are about 15,000, apparently. Not all of them will get a chance to speak. In fact, only one of them will get a chance to speak, and we don't know even really how that back and forth is going to go. The Republicans outsourcing their work to an outside prosecutor hired from out of infamous Maricopa County, Arizona. This should be very interesting. We'll see how this goes. And about 10 o'clock, we expect Twitter to run away with it all. And we'll see how things are going. Maybe we can get you guys to keep one eye on it and keep me up to date on how things are going. I can't watch and do the show. That would be difficult to do. But, well, the first hour of these things are very often taken up by opening statements anyway. We'll see whether senators bother with taking opening statements today or just get right to it. All right, plenty of things happening. Greg Dworkin should be with us. He's already preparing his raft of stories and roundup, and it's really hard to see how we could spend a great deal of time on anything else. But, you know, I'm always wary that we're being distracted from something important because someone always tells me on Twitter that whatever it is I think either is important and deserves to have some time spent on it or not. Maybe even just a passing thought. It was all not worth it because I was being distracted from something else. But I don't know. The something else's have faded considerably over the last couple of days. But there are definitely a few additional notes for the day. We're going to have to talk, and I'm sure we'll talk with Greg, about Trump's crazy presser yesterday. Apparently the first one he's done in some time. Joan, I noted, tweeting yesterday. So I guess we know why they haven't let him do this for 587 days. Daniel Dale, I think, probably has the best roundup of all of it, although, well, that's open to interpretation. Greg can tell us what roundups he may have about it. But Daniel Dale usually live tweets pretty much any time the president is making extended remarks and tweets out how much of it is wrong and or crazy. So we'll get to that as well. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Hey, good morning. A lot to talk about today.
You know, some things are happening.
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
normal.
economic reports are coming out, right?
Yes,
and then,
right.
Then there's the rest of the day.
Yeah, I mean, economic reports. It seems like they're coming out all the time. Like the economy's an ongoing thing.
Every month, you know?
Yeah. All right. I'll let them do it.
Yeah, I suppose.
Okay. Well,
so we have this made-for-TV reality show hearing coming up.
That's
which
a good way of putting it.
is just going to be totally fascinating and at the same time horrible.
Oh.
And it's terrible that the whole thing has to take place in the first instance.
Yes.
But this time you get a hearing, you get a chance to see and hear the people that we're talking about. Kavanaugh's been all over the news. He did the Fox interview. He went first, so we kind of know about him. But then we get to hear about her. And interestingly, John Heilman this morning played a clip of an upcoming segment with one of the other accusers, the Avenatti associated accuser. And she actually came across in the clip that I saw as extremely articulate and well-reasoned. And when you see and hear the women, as opposed to just having people write about them, it is a completely and totally different thing.
That is true.
First piece I want to talk to you about is from the Los Angeles Times, written by a couple of or three political scientists, talking about the optics of this. Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee have a problem. They're all men.
Oh.
And she goes on, they go on to say two women and one man. Authors, some Republicans are worried that any attack on Ford's character will be viewed as an attack on all women. Surely this is one reason Republicans on the committee have hired a female attorney to question both Ford and Kavanaugh. Their fears are well-founded. According to our research, the committee's gender disparity will send a powerful signal. The signal will not only concern whether Republicans respect women, but whether the committee can be trusted at all. Because political scientists link fairness and trust to legitimacy, we concluded that an absence of women makes the process appear illegitimate.
Oh. Well, yes, it does.
So that is, of course, the problem. Other interesting backgrounds before we get to the hearing itself. This is from Emily Badger, who's a New York Times writer covering urban policy for Upshot. Mm-hmm. She notes, when Sonia Sotomayor was nominated, there was much talk about how her working-class Bronx background might inform her worldview today. But we seldom talk about wealth, whiteness, or male privilege in the same way as if they're cultures that shape people. But of course they are. And I want to follow that up with a couple of different ways to go here. One is my local paper, talking about Debbie Ramirez, the second accuser, who was the Yale student who said that Kavanaugh exposed himself to her. She grew up in, I think the proper term that people use to describe towns like this is the gritty town of Shelton, Connecticut.
Oh. Is that gritty?
Gritty. It's very gritty.
Connecticut, not often.
It's not an upper middle class area.
Okay.
And she's of Puerto Rican heritage, Debbie Ramirez.
All right.
And the article is, in Shelton, former neighbors divided on Ramirez's accusations. And the article is interesting in the following respect. First of all, it talks about the fact that she went to Catholic schools. So a lot of the regulars in Shelton didn't know her because they didn't go to the same school.
Oh, I see.
But the people who were at her school speak incredibly highly of her. She was obviously very smart. She was, top 5 in her class, wound up going to Yale. Then they interview locals. And as has been said otherwise, but certainly clear from this article, how you feel about Ramirez and what she's doing has little to do with asking men versus asking women, which is something that gets played up all the time. Mm-hmm. It's actually whether you're asking a Republican or you're asking a Democrat.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? And you hear a lot of the same complaints all the time. We don't know if it's true. There's no corroboration. There's no documentation. I think it's a put-up. They don't want the Supreme Court balance this swing. Tell me how good your memory is when you're drunk and the incident took place 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. And then they throw in this one because it's, of course, Connecticut. Then there's Mayor Mark Loretti, who was once involved in a grand jury probe of corruption in Shelton. He was never charged with any crimes. People who enter public life get accused of things that happen to me. Sometimes politics plays a role in these things. There's a lot of gamesmanship going on, and it's anybody's guess this time as to what will happen. I think that's actually a pretty good summary.
Well, it certainly summarizes all the various excuses and pushback.
Well, I got an even better one here. 10 ways to respond to Brett Kavanaugh's defenders from a law professor, Patricia J. Williams.
Okay.
And this is from The Nation. It's very good. I'll give you the complaint, and then I'll give you the pushback.
Okay. Like a chart.
Number 1, look at all the good stuff he's done. He's an altar boy and a scout. Now, many good people did good stuff and also commit terrible wrongs. Have we learned nothing from Larry Nassar and Jerry Sandusky, both of whom were popular sports figures and child molesters at the same time? When actions in one sphere, or appearances like beauty or class or race or the number of advanced degrees, become ciphers for embodied goodness or badness, we are in the slippery realm of profiling and prejudice.
Okay. True.
Right?
Also, those were probably 35 years ago.
Well, that's in there, too. She's the only one coming forward. If he'd really done it, there'd be others. How many do there have to be, she says. Second woman, Debbie Ramirez, we were just talking about, says Kavanaugh thrust his penis in her face during their time at Yale. And, of course, there was the third one, Ms. Swetnick, who did the interview with John Hallman, who Avenetti's associated with. Yes. But the point is not, well, I say associated with, I mean representing. But the point is not whether Kavanaugh did another thing at some other time and place. The idea that assault doesn't count unless it comes in multiples, is logic akin to a dog being granted one free bite.
Okay.
Right? As the woman who was raped by Stanford University student Brock Turner wrote, we shouldn't create a culture that suggests rapists learn that rape is wrong through trial and error.
The other kind of trial, maybe, but...
Number 3, it was 36 years ago. After so much time, she's still stuck on that. And the law professor writes, funny that, how trauma and PTSD linger so annoyingly long after the party's over. And we're going to see a lot of that on display at 10 o'clock this morning.
Yes.
Number 4, it wasn't intercourse, it was just a touch.
That was disturbing.
The common law definition of battery is harmful or offensive non-consensual contact with another's person. Surely Blasey Ford's allegations constitute just a touch of that.
Huh.
Right? Number 5, what boy hasn't done this in high school? You can't judge a man's character based on what he did at 17. She deals with that a little bit. It's simply not true that every high school boy does what Kavanaugh's alleged to have done, nor is every wayward teenager the beneficiary of such boys will be boys' excuses for their bad behavior. When the probation officer in Brock Turner's case, cited his having had to give up a hard-earned swimming scholarship as a reason for mitigation, his victim's response was apt. If I had been sexually assaulted by an unathletic guy from a community college, what would his sentence be?
Yeah, good question.
Right? So I'm finding this very insightful. The allegations against Brad Kavanaugh are destroying his life. That's number 6. It hovered somewhere between privileged arrogance and outright gangsterism to assert that allegations of urgent public interest shouldn't be put forward if the other party will lose face. For to have deliberate fact-finding bodies as part of our governance is both cynical and corrosive to dismiss these processes out of hand as lynchings, witch hunts, or mob rule.
Uh-oh. Witch hunts.
Right? Number 7, if it's true, she would have said something sooner. There's many reasons victims of sexual assault find it difficult to speak, not just sooner, but at all. The power of Me Too is precisely the accumulation of narratives whose telling provides courage as well as corroboration, without which individual stories might never be connected. So, the Bill Cosby, the Larry Nassar, you're looking at people who are supporting other people. But you're also looking at Donald Trump in his press conference yesterday fighting back about Me Too, basically saying the whole thing's a crock, it's a con game, and, they're trying to take power away from men. That's, essentially what he said, if you go back and look at his bringing this up at all. So, it's a really fraught moment because a lot of the Kavanaugh defenders are basically saying, how can you, take away a man's right to sit on the Supreme Court? How can you take away a man's livelihood with these kinds of allegations? When it all comes down to, if he did these things, then there should be consequences.
Yeah.
Number 8, maybe she liked him. Maybe he didn't pay attention to her afterward. Maybe he went out with another girl and she got jealous. For those who were born, says the professor, who were born after the Hill-Thomas hearings, it's worth going back and listening to the transcripts, in particular the incredible rant from John Doggett III, a Texas lawyer who pilloried Hill as lonely, pining, spinsterish erotomaniac. When Senator Hatch recently said he believed Blasey Ford was mixed up, all I could think of are his own prior descriptions of Hill as a jealous and demented person.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? Number 9, an investigation wouldn't help because it doesn't matter what anybody else has to say. This is a particularly cynical form of closed-mindedness, a seeming commitment to a framing of he said, she said, even when testimonial, forensic, or other kinds of evidence might be brought to bear. It's an ultra-libertarian way of saying, I don't care. My mind's already made up.
A gimme-tarian way.
Pretty much. And number 10, who are we to judge? Who indeed?
Yeah.
We are the people. And in the present circumstance, it's precisely our democratic duty and that of our elected representatives to hold to the highest account to judge those who would judge us. So I think it's a pretty good summary of, some of the things you hear and why they're important. This one is short. It's from Christopher Moore, who is an author. He says, the night before last, this is just yesterday, the night before last, my wife of 23 years told me that at 14 she was raped by a classmate while another classmate looked on. She named names, gave details. This is the first time she had told anyone because she felt ashamed and didn't want to disappoint her family. This story is being told with permission. This has been an incredibly painful trauma for her that has been manifesting and haunting her for 40 years. She's agonized over the last 2 days whether to reveal it publicly and decided because it might help others to have me post this because I have a lot of followers. This is not my story, nor will I elaborate, except to ask you to recognize how difficult this is for her and any survivor of sexual assault. She spent her life recovering and is perhaps the kindest person I know. Quote, there are more of us than there are not, she said. And that's the end of that summary there. I'll follow that with a little more academic one. This is a thread by Nicole Badera, who is a sociologist who studies adolescent sexual violence.
Yes.
And in this thread, I offer the basic facts everybody should know about sexual assault to make sense of the Kavanaugh allegation, citations as well.
I saw this one. I haven't read it yet.
Right? It's common, especially among adolescents. The best studies estimate as many as 10 to 11% of young men commit an act of rape before graduating from college. That's a lot.
Wow. Yes.
Okay. Most of these men don't harbor a particular hatred for women, but instead use violence and harassment as a way to bond with other men and assert their masculinity, otherwise known as locker room talk.
Yes. We read a little bit about that yesterday. There's still more.
Yeah. We have reason to believe that these masculinity-asserting behaviors are more severe among young men, including virgins. These behaviors are so common that girls and women commonly dismiss them or minimize their impact. Being sexually harassed or assaulted is just part of being around adolescent boys, wolf whistles and all that sort of stuff. In the 60s, when I was growing up, women, girls knew simply not to walk past construction worker sites by themselves.
Yeah, well, yes, we knew, but we're forced to.
Sometimes you had to.
Yeah.
Right? So you went as a group because you had to protect yourself.
Yeah.
The impact of these actions can be long-lasting, especially if survivors didn't seek and receive effective support and resources. That's why many women are still hurting years into the future, even if they didn't make much of the violence at the time. And that's one reason why Dr. Ford and Ms. Ramirez might have waited to come forward and add Ms. Swetnick. Women feel a pressure to minimize what happened, but it can be hard to ignore when the pain remains and intensifies over time. And that's why a teenage rape often comes up in counseling as an adult. Okay, which is, I think, what happened with Dr. Ford. Another reason is that sexual assault survivors aren't typically treated well when they make reports of sexual assault to any organization. Even organizations they trust and have close relationships with are apt to hurt them, compounding the trauma. And then she gives references. The last study, she says, was about colleges. And here's another one making a similar point about the criminal justice system and hospitals where rape kits are collected. The point is, making a claim of sexual assault is hard and often harmful. And regardless of the reasons for staying quiet, it's important to note we should probably start by believing Dr. Ford and Ms. Ramirez, since false allegations of sexual assault are actually really, really rare.
Yeah.
Okay, and then points out that the way this is unfolding isn't surprising to professionals. And then at the end she says, we have to add Julie Swetnick to a list of survivors coming forward under tough circumstances who deserve to be believed and heard. So again, that's the background for a lot of this. And I think also the Cosby sentencing, plus statements from some of his victims, I think is important as well. And then finally, in terms of background, and I think we can get all of this in before the break. Yeah. Which is good because I'm going to have a relatively short segment today. This is from Vanity Fair. It's by the excellent Emily Jane Fox, who's a really, really good reporter. And the title is, I Was Ashamed. After Ford's accusation, Holton Arms alumna wrestle with their own truths together. The subheading here is 7 Holton alums recently shared their experiences of sexual assault with me. Many had not spoken of the incident since they occurred in high school or shortly thereafter. These are not specifically targeting Brett Kavanaugh, just the environment and the school that he came from. All of them said that they had not widely shared their stories out of shame, embarrassment, and fear of backlash, and they all felt compelled to come forward now to support their fellow alum, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, and to change the culture of silence and misogyny they've experienced. So, again, part of the reason not to come forward is because there's pressure not to. It's especially true when you have somebody who's a male of power. And again, whether it's Les Moonves and whether it's Harvey Weinstein, the very things that Donald Trump was railing against, of course, he's got his own issues.
Yeah.
When powerful men threaten to silence you, it's very difficult for people in a uneven power arrangement to really come forward with this. So this is part of the environment thing. Here's another one, and this is an article from Washington Post, February 1990. 7 of the most prestigious private schools, including Georgetown Prep, wrote a letter to parents of all students warning them that students are throwing large parties where excessive drinking and sexual license are common.
Yes. They're warning them now?
That was back in 1990.
Oh, I see. Well,
so this stuff took place in the 80s, but the point being that the whole background for all of this is totally consistent with what the allegers, what the alleged victims of assault are claiming.
Yeah,
it's not like, oh, that can't be, that's ridiculous. You're saying this happened in a place where everybody knows this can't happen.
That's true. People are meant to think that.
Church.
Yeah, well, that too. Among people
or
who
like
never
University
would.
of Michigan,
or anywhere else. And I find the emphasis on the 80s very interesting too. I mean, I was approximately of the same age, and I don't know, maybe I'm mistaken, but I figured probably most of the same behavior was going on pretty much always, and probably still. I'm
a
curious
decade
about
older
the
than you. It was going on in the 70s.
Yeah, I'm curious about the emphasis on the 80s, though it is interesting because, of course, the unspoken part of all this is that this is the Reagan 80s, the conservative backlash to the free love hippie types that were obviously being accused of doing all these things before. Yeah. And so the button down Reagan types apparently, if anything, I guess, took it to the next level and really accelerated the violent side of it, and probably not coincidental.
Right. So this is from the Vanity Fair piece. To many Holton students, Ford's description of the party she attended in 82 felt familiar. Beginning in middle school, there were parties with young men from surrounding schools like Georgetown Prep, Landon, St. Albans, every Friday and Saturday night at big houses set back from winding, dimly lit streets. There was money to get alcohol. Parents were absent. The homes had pools and movie theaters and sweeping yards. There were teenagers in a candy store. Yeah. It was a highly professional culture of parents, quote, many of whom self-selected these schools to be a big babysitter. A lot of them just parked the kids and left. One 80s Landon alum who socialized with Ford in high school told me.
That's entirely possible. I mean, certainly among elite prep schools, there's also the boarding school culture, which is has its own set of difficulties.
Right. I don't know if it's from this article or other articles. Basically, what would happen is that there'd be parties, and what you'd do is you wouldn't know where the party was. This gets back to why didn't you remember the house and where it is? You went to the neighborhood. You saw where all the cars were parked. You got out, and that's where the party was.
Yep. Pretty much, yeah. There's a big day yesterday for both publishing and sharing older pieces that are pretty much about the same thing. I was not necessarily a part of Bart O'Kavanaugh's crowd, but I attended the same sort of school, sometimes in the same area, sometimes not, and I saw the same thing. And it shouldn't be surprising that at different times in different places, the common denominator being one, teenagers, and two, very often, lots of privilege.
Right. So, meanwhile, Ariel Edwards-Levy has a piece in the HuffPost today about how Brett Kavanaugh's poll numbers are firmly in the red. Voters on both sides of the aisle say they're paying attention to the fight over Supreme Court appointments. I suspect there's going to be a lot of viewership of this hearing this morning. For Supreme Court nominee, that's deeply unusual. Speaking of unusual, something that has really bothered me about this whole thing is the commercials, which, by the way, are getting creepier.
Oh. Uh-oh.
Because on cable TV, what plays are these Judicial Crisis Network ads.
Turn to those guys, yeah.
In support of Brett Kavanaugh. Usually, from the very beginning, they pick women to do the pushing.
Yes.
They're the narrators.
Right.
He's good around women. He likes to have, high school basketball teams around him, which really gets creepy when you think about what's going on now.
Right.
So that may well have backfired. But the whole idea that there'd be all this money to run these ads as if it were a political campaign.
Well, it is.
Is weird.
Yes.
It's just weird.
Well, we learned yesterday in reading another part of the background of Leonard Leo.
Yeah.
He runs both the Federalist Society and the Judicial Crisis Network.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea
Yeah,
of
they're
the
related.
fact that
This
they
is
can
the
coordinate.
Israeli connection. And there's a small, tight number of very conservative legal folks who want to see Kavanaugh nominated no matter what, whether he's guilty or not.
Yes.
Because if he's not nominated, it's going to hurt their influence.
Right. It will be very difficult. Trump would be very likely to say, another Federalist Society. I'm sick of these guys. They gave me this headache of Kavanaugh. Give me another list.
By the way, I suspect that's already happened.
Yes.
But there it is. They're going to maintain the illusion that they're still important and everybody has to listen to them because, they know what they're doing.
That's all they know.
They didn't vet Kavanaugh particularly well. But what's happened is lately, I saw one last night for the first time, and this one was an ad which basically said smear campaign. They're trying to smear Brett Kavanaugh. Don't let that happen. Again, it's like a political campaign. It's just really, really jarring. Sure.
Yeah.
Free speech in this Supreme Court may say that that's okay, but I don't understand why regular folks don't find it offensive to have a Supreme Court pick pushed on you as if it's a flawed candidate.
Yeah, I'm not sure people know to think it's offensive. They've just come to think of everything as politicized, or they've come to Armando's conclusion that people ought to just admit it already.
Well, they should.
Yeah, I guess so.
And then finally, new polling from Pew today. Democrats have an edge in the 2018 midterm voting preference. It's now a 10-point lead for them, but it's incredibly enormous with women.
I can imagine it would be.
Yeah, 58 to 35.
Wow. Okay, well...
how is today's optics going to help that is my point.
Not much, if people are watching. There's a big question about whether the normals are tuned in or not. All right, we'll take our break. I don't know if you need to run, but thank you for your help. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com.
Here it is.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Gorkin is still with us just for a few more minutes, and so we'll continue on with our roundup of what's happening this morning. And let's see, what now? You're sharing...
well, this is from NBC News, because Heilman was on Morning Joe this morning showing this and giving clips of the upcoming This Weekend interview with Julie Swetnick. Kavanaugh accuser Julie Swetnick, I don't think he belongs on the Supreme Court. Swetnick, who spoke with Showtime's The Circus, marked the first time a Kavanaugh accuser had spoken on camera. Julie Swetnick, the third woman to come forward with allegations of sexual misconduct against Brett Kavanaugh, said that all of the accusations against President Donald Trump's Supreme Court nominee must be investigated and that he doesn't belong on the nation's high court.
Okay.
Brett Kavanaugh's going for a seat where he's going to have that seat on the Supreme Court for the rest of his life, and if he's going to have that seat legitimately, all of these things should be investigated. From what I experienced firsthand, I just don't think he belongs on the Supreme Court. She looks at the camera and says that it's really powerful. Okay. And again, gives you an idea of the value of image and video well above what you just read.
Yes, so that's always a good point to reiterate. It's very true. I'll have to take a look at that one.
And at the same time, all of these accusers have the option, they always have the option of going on 60 Minutes or such and talking about this.
Yes. And
the timing of such could be between whenever the hearing is today, if in fact there is a vote tomorrow, which I'm still doubting, and that's only the committee vote, and then it has to go to the floor, so they would have time to go to the media and give an interview before the actual floor vote takes place.
Yes.
Now, the politics of it, again, nobody knows how this is going to go. to the point where, I mean, if you look on Predictit and see is he going to be confirmed or not, it's like, 55-45, 54, 46. If you talk to people following Congress, the good folks, who are generally very, very adept at figuring out what's going on, there seems to be around 10 or 15 I'm not sure votes.
Yes.
Including, I mean, you have people who you would normally expect to be just an absolute yes, who are saying, I want to wait for today's hearing. So I think that there's a very good chance this is going to go down in flames. If so, it'll bring the conservative network with it. And on that note, again, a couple of things I think are important to reiterate. The accusers want the FBI to investigate. Kavanaugh doesn't. That is one fact that is just impossible to ignore. And at the same time, I see my never-Trump conservative friends, because I don't talk to the pro-Trump people very much, rallying around Kavanaugh because they think they're getting something taken away from them.
Oh.
And of course you can say to them, well, Merrick Garland, and then they just get upset.
Right.
Completely different.
Yes.
Well, actually, it is completely different because nobody accused Merrick Garland of being unfit.
Right.
But they just don't like the idea that this can happen. And I think a lot of it, again, has to do with the whole patriarchal construct that they have for themselves. They don't like the idea that accusers can simply come forth and take power away from men. They just don't like that. They don't like it.
Yeah.
That's why they're conservatives.
That's basically what it comes down to. I always feel a little uncomfortable walking onto that ground because there are so many people who could speak to it better than I can. But I mean, this is the time for like mainstream acknowledgement that that's a real thing. That's not just something that crazy leftists say. This is illustrating one of those moments. Not only that they just don't like it when people take power away from them, but the last couple of days of reading has been really interesting for me. Just slightly different takes on this story and stories like it and what it means. And in particular, yesterday's readings about how to view these sorts of incidents, particularly when there are other men, other boys around at the time, and how it's performative more for the other boys than anything about the girls that are involved, that they're just staking out a place for themselves in this pecking order. And it's amazing. And this is one of the more interesting things about it has been learning about just how much of the elite in society's image of themselves revolves around damaging women to get where they're going. It's incredible.
Well, I'm going to read you one from somebody who I interact often with online, Seth Mandel, who writes a commentary.
Yes.
And who's an op-ed editor at the New York Post.
Right.
Okay. And he's got a nice little tweet storm kind of summarizing this a little bit. I'm just going to add to the completely anecdotal discussion of whether ranks are closing around Cav. First, to be clear, I don't have any idea what this means for voters or the midterms or whatever, and I don't care. I'm just offering an observation with no larger lesson. I simply find it interesting, not to be taken as an indication of anything more, but I'm fascinated by the sheer number of very mild-mannered conservatives. He's one. He's not a bomb thrower. Mild-mannered conservatives. He's wrong all the time. Don't get me wrong, but he's
okay.
he's nice about it. But I'm fascinated by the sheer number of very mild-mannered conservatives who have said, some on here, but some in private, that what's happening to Cav is a gross injustice and must be fought. These are, almost without exception, men and women who are horrified by Trump, horrified by his treatment of women, and don't take sexual assault lightly or are even victims themselves. I'll tell you what these folks are not. They're not but he fights right-wingers who tweet cruise ship emojis at Bill Kristol. In fact, all of those I can think of make fun of the but he fights nonsense. What this tells you is that this, and it's really important that people on the left or righties opposed to Cav understand, this is not about Trump. Repeat, this is not about Trump to them. That's important because they're not even saying, well, now I'll vote Trump. I've observed this from a distance. I find Ford's claim credible. I've said in the past Republicans should cut their losses. I've talked about the cultural reckoning I'm seeing and how conservatives are missing it. But I've been pretty surprised at how often I've been the squish standing alone among discussions with fellow squishes. I generally don't know what to think of some of this stuff, but lines are forming in places they didn't used to. So why am I saying this? For this reason. Because the rush to judgment here, and by that I mean not people who believe some of these claims, but rather a certainty we're all seeing from certain corners that Cav is a rapist, is going to leave a lot of good people, judicious people, empathetic people branded rape apologists. And that's so incredibly unfair, I almost find it ridiculous that even it has to be said. When we talk about rapid polarization, this is what we mean. This is a completely unnecessary extreme attempt to rob people of their legitimacy. The attempt at persuasion has completely evaporated. People on the left are going to hold up reasonable conservatives and say, hey, remember this guy's a rape apologist. Don't forget it. And this naked character assassination won't be forgotten either. I can't figure out why so many are invested in driving the non-Trumper pundits out of politics, but it's what they're doing. It's being done by mainstream publications and folks who will staff the next Democratic White House. The reputations of good people are collateral damage here. You will wonder when the good conservatives have gone, but only because you feel like hunting again. You're painting American politics Trump, and just as you wish, it won't be forgotten. End. So, of course, I challenged him on that. He didn't answer me, but, I said, basically, you're conflating the never-Trumpers with the complaint that people are yelling at you and now you can't get a job.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it just reminded me of the Kevin Williamson brouhaha. These are the same people saying, how unfair is it that you kick Kevin Williamson out of a writing job just because he said that nasty things about people who get abortions, they should be killed or whatever. How could you do that?
Yeah.
He needs to work for a living like us.
Right.
So but it's an interesting observation, which if you follow Twitter, certainly on Twitter at least is true. People are on the conservative side rallying around Kavanaugh, partly because they don't want to lose, and partly because they see other people defending Kavanaugh get savage, and they don't like that.
Well,
and okay, fine, but I'm just you can be on the right side of this or the wrong side of this. But it's just an observation that more conservatives are, in fact, going to try and support Kavanaugh to the end, and therefore it makes it that much more difficult to pull his nomination. And you step back and wonder, if McConnell is hearing stuff like this, is he going to be in the situation of, let's say this hearing goes as we expect, that Dr. Ford is credible and Kavanaugh is at least restrained enough not to attack her, which would be a disaster, but it still looks bad. And people like Susan Collins, who already, there's tons of stories about in her caucuses and others, are extremely uncomfortable with this. In fact, the reports are that the one that bothers Collins the most is Julie Swetnick, the Avenatti client, because she has a sworn deposition and Collins says she's all about process. And now I have something in my hand that's real. And I can't ignore this, so don't push it through. Why aren't we doing an FBI investigation, so on and so forth? So whether it's Murkowski, Flake, Collins, Corker, Jody Ernst has not come out in favor of Kavanaugh. She wants to wait and see what the hearings is and so on and so forth. Let's say Flake says no, and therefore it goes out of committee with a no vote slightly, and then it goes to the floor, and it loses.
Yeah, right.
So does McConnell want that? Does he want to put his senators who don't want to take this difficult vote in the position of having to vote to satisfy the Seth Mandel conservatives, or does he pull it to avoid the senators having to go back on the campaign trail and run against the Heidi Heitkamp when this nomination went down? It failed. Yeah. Because senators don't like to take difficult votes, and they especially don't like to take difficult votes in something that's going to be a losing proposition. And this is one of those situations where, unlike with the McCain situation, I think they'll know exactly how many votes they have before they vote.
Yeah, most likely. They usually do.
Because, McCain would hold out just to say, screw you. Mm-hmm. But Murkowski and Collins will tell McConnell, what they're voting on, so will Flake, one way or the other. So they'll know.
I know.
And given the fact that they know what the result is going to be, what does McConnell do? He's already said, I'm bringing it to the floor. But was that just bullying tactics because he wants to put pressure on them? Or is he actually going to do that?
Yeah.
I would suspect the former and not the latter. He's not stupid.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, and it's one of those things that you can predict either way and explain away after the fact. He's not stupid. He wouldn't bring it to the floor if he knew he was going to lose. On the other hand, if he does bring it to the floor, the people will say, "Well, that McConnell, he tells you what he's going to do. Believe it." So, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know what the calculus is. I mean, I couldn't tell you for sure what's going to happen unless I'm in the room and hear the people discussing it. And even if you are, that doesn't mean that they'll come out and announce what actually happened in the room with the closed doors. They'll say, well, we don't want to have the vote, but we don't want to have it for this reason. However, it's best if you go out and say that we don't want to have it for that reason. And then, you're left wondering. So it's always it's a difficult guess. Because my bias and your bias is, you don't want to have every woman in America angry with you. So you're not going to go ahead and have this vote and put that many Republican senators on the record towing the line for Trump with his damaged nominee. But that's just my bias. I don't know that they believe that. I don't know whether McConnell feels it. I don't know whether he believes it. I don't know whether he believes it but doesn't want to let on that he believes it because he knows the Republican base finds that weak. It's difficult to know.
It is. It's really hard. But I will say, if we were having this show at 2:00 this afternoon, I think we'd be able to game it out a little bit better.
Yeah, well, we'd have some...
Because we'd see how the hearing went.
Some evidence to go on, something to base things on.
Yeah. Anyway, with that, I'm going to go. I'll leave you to your show.
All right.
And it's always been fun talking with you. This is Greg Dworkin, speaking with my good friend David Waldman. Kagro in the morning. Is Joan... no, Joan, that was yesterday. Today's Thursday. Today's Thursday.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. You got the show Friday, and then I'll be back on Monday.
All right. Well, presuming that we're going to have a Monday and everything, I'm going to bet on it. What are they saying on Predict It?
That North Korea and Trump really don't get along as well as they say. That's what they say.
Well, so Monday's about 50-50 then.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
All right. See
Very
you
good. Thanks, Greg.
Maybe.
Yeah. You never know. And we did miss out on Joan yesterday. And Joan, I'll let you know this. A lot of disappointed people. I know you were very busy. I don't mean to do that to guilt you. I mean for you to hear that and think, oh, how nice, everybody missed me. But then I thought, maybe it didn't feel that way when I just said it. But everyone missed you. So we'll be looking forward to hearing from you again next week. And I imagine we'll probably still be on this story. I don't know how this is really going to resolve itself. It's very difficult to figure out. All right, let's see. I have so many things to share that once again, I don't know exactly what order I'll do it in. Here's something. Let's start with this. Another item from rape culture that I guess didn't make a dent when it first happened. Why is this story so old? I feel like, it's not that old. It's from late July, but was just making the rounds again yesterday, I'm sure, in the context of, look what happens among people of privilege. And I guess we'll go to it's reported around the country, lots of different entries on it. There's local news, there's national news. I'm going to take the New York Post entry on it, because they tend to really dish it out on people when they look like they're jerkasses, and we'll see how they report. Oh, this is an Associated Press article that they're running. Anyway, this was making the rounds again yesterday from late July. Grandson of ex-Virginia governor dodges prison in rape case. Just sort of floated, alongside all of these other crazy stories about how we just don't either recognize or punish rape culture at least among elite circles. A former Virginia governor's grandson, accused of raping a fellow University of Virginia student, has avoided prison time. And this is, again, an AP piece running in the New York Post discussing the reporting of the local paper down in Charlottesville, Virginia, the Daily Progress. The Daily Progress reports Stephen Dalton Barril, it's B-A-R-I-L, Barrel, I'm going to guess. I don't know, even though that could be B-A-R-R-E-L. Anyway, Stephen Dalton Barrel's charges were reduced Friday from felony rape and felony sodomy to misdemeanor sexual battery and felony unlawful wounding as part of his Alford plea. By the way, Alford plea, a special classification of pleading. There's even privilege in pleading. You can plead guilty in criminal court to short circuit a trial and save everybody the time, but you don't actually admit to the criminal act and you pretend you're still innocent. You just say, I'm going to enter a guilty plea for the purpose of getting around to the plea deal that we worked out and not wasting everybody's time. But I really didn't do it, which, I'm sure is a highly questionable practice in some quarters, but I'm sure in some cases it makes a certain amount of sense. I don't know whether it helps or hurts us here, but as part of the Alford plea, which is used when a defendant acknowledges there is enough evidence to convict them while they maintain innocence, that's a better explanation, I guess, Barrell's initial charges of felony rape and felony sodomy were reduced to misdemeanor sexual battery and felony unlawful wounding, respectively. Can you imagine this? I mean, you don't have to imagine it happened. I mean, and you could have imagined it happening before it actually happened, too. That's the big problem. The maximum prison sentence that he could have faced was 5 years, all of which Judge Humes J. Franklin suspended. Barrell will be on supervised probation for 5 years and not allowed to have any contact with the victim or key witnesses, which really, gee whiz, don't go out of your way or anything, preventing contact between him and the victim. You know what would have done that? Prison. But instead, we have to do it this way. If the case had gone to trial with the initial charges, Barrell would have faced a mandatory minimum prison sentence of 10 years. And he's a young man. It would have been fine. But I guess we didn't want to ruin his life. Barrell is the grandson of former Virginia governor, a former Virginia governor, initially faced charges of rape and sodomy after a young woman, identified in the court as M.H., told police she was raped by him on the night of January 31st and into the early morning hours of February 1st, 2017. I will warn everybody again, I'm probably too late about this one. I'm going to read it's not graphic details of this, but I'm going to read over the description of the incident just so that those of you who are interested and capable of listening to something like this can follow along and get a sense of just what kind of entitlement we're talking about, because it speaks to another of the aspects of the Kavanaugh situation that's so baffling and puzzling to people. Well, he was a nice guy, he came from a good family, that sort of thing, right? Or he only did it once. Like, how many times do you really need to do it? So I don't know. Again, if you find this sort of thing triggering for you, give us 5 minutes. I'm just going to read the AP's description of it. It's not going to be outrageous, I don't think, but it's coming up, and it's coming up now. All right. So MH, the victim in this case, told police that she and Barrell met at Coop's, C-O-U-P-E', Coop's, a bar on Elliewood Avenue at about 11:30 p.m. January 31st. When MH said she wanted to go home, she said Barrell offered to walk her there. The two lived close to each other near 14th Street Northwest and Wurtland Street. But when they got close to that area, MH said Barrell playfully picked her up and tried to redirect her toward his apartment. I can see how this could be triggering for some of you. I hope you're already taking a pause from the show. But I'm just stopping to point out here, this is another one of those situations. I'm thinking back of all these other areas where people say, well, he was so nice. He was respectful of women. He was honorable. He was the supreme gentleman, as what's his name, the guy who shot up Santa Barbara, called himself. And you see that sort of language actually celebrating his actions among the weirder parts of the alt-right incel community. But here's a guy who finds somebody who's at a bar and says, you know what, I feel uncomfortable walking home on my own. I'm worried that I might not be safe. And he offers himself up as a safe way home and ends up being the attacker. So the two ended up at Barrell's darkened apartment, and that's where MH said Barrell forcibly kissed, raped, and sodomized her. During the proceeding, MH gave a victim statement condemning The year and a half of hell Barrel put her through, and just wait, there's more to come, I'm sure. You raped me, whether you want to hear it or not, she said. You robbed me of feeling safe in a city I called my home. In the U.S. justice system, Barrel is perceived as innocent until proven guilty, MH said. That's coming up a lot lately, isn't it? But as a victim, she is seen as a liar until proven otherwise. How come nobody's talking about that? After 17 months, she had rebuilt her life, she said, and agreed to a plea deal because she did not want to endure a trial and relive the trauma. That's why we're getting this crazy Alford plea, and why he ends up, first of all, facing 5 years instead of 10, and then getting none of it. Franklin accepted the plea agreement, which he deemed to be a fair compromise, in part because neither party was happy with it. Arashini Pather, the Deputy Commonwealth's Attorney for Charlottesville, thanked MH for the courage and strength she showed over the past 17 months and said she hoped the plea agreement helps to bring her closure. Sexual assault cases are difficult, Pather says, and can be damaging to both sides. When there is the ability to reach out across the courtroom and find some commonality in a plea agreement, it's the responsible thing to do, she said. I'm not positive about that, by the way. Defense attorney Rhonda Quagliana said she was, that's an interesting spelling, Quagliana, said she was confident Barrel would have been acquitted had the trial gone before a jury. That would have been interesting. I mean, think about that just for a second. We have it to the point where he is, now, mind you, he's taking an Alford plea, which the definition of which given in the AP write-up of this is when you know there's enough evidence to convict you, but you still think you're innocent and want to just save everybody the trouble of a trial or whatever. Now, his defense attorney is saying she's confident that he would have been acquitted. Now, what kind of defense attorney says, I'm confident you'll be acquitted, but because there's enough evidence to convict you, which really, says that you're not very confident that the person will be acquitted, you should just go ahead and take this plea deal. That's pretty interesting. However, given the 10-year minimum sentence he faced if convicted, they opted not to pursue a trial. By the way, another perverse outcome of our law and order demands in this country. We're sick and tired of these violent criminal offenders getting off with a slap on the wrist. I mean, I guess that's supposed to be when they're black or Hispanic. But when they're white or the sons of former governors or whatever, grandsons of former governors, and UVA students and upstanding young men and women and blah, 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 then that's fine. We don't mind that because look at what happened here, right? We demand no more of this slap on the wrist stuff. We want mandatory minimums. There should be a minimum so that judges can't screw around with it. And these liberal judges don't let criminals off the hook, right? So look what happens. Now you have a mandatory minimum of 10 years imposed, and what's the reaction? The judge says, well, the 10-year thing, it's so harsh, that's so crazy, that I'll instead entertain this convoluted, idiotic setup of the Alford plea. And again, I'm sure there are some places where it makes a great deal of sense, and this is just one of those things that ticks you off instead. Instead, I'll accept this idea of, well, you can plead guilty even though you swear you're not guilty so that I can get out of the 10-year mandatory minimum and instead go with the guideline of 5 years and then suspend the whole thing because everybody's so sick and tired of slaps on the wrist. I'll slap you on the wrist. All right. So where are we? It's hard to predict. And in the face of even the possibility he could have been convicted, he chose to enter an Alford plea, his defense attorney said. Barrel is the son of Steve Barrel, a Richmond attorney who made an unsuccessful bid in 2005 for the Republican nomination for Attorney General in Virginia. Barrel's grandfather was John N. Dalton. Remember, he's, what's his first name? I can't even remember the kid's name. Stephen Dalton Barrel. So he is the grandson of John N. Dalton, who served as the 63rd governor of Virginia from 1978 to 1982, before my time here in Virginia. So I don't remember him, and I certainly know nothing about Steve Barrel or Baril or however he pronounces it. I didn't bother looking into failed Republican candidates for the nomination for Attorney General in 2005. I'm sure I missed that. All right, well, just sort of interesting in a another angle of looking at all of this and the way we treat this crime and pretend that it isn't a crime. I'm sure you all saw circulating on Twitter yesterday also, I don't know, sort of a random interview with a Trump supporter in Bozeman, Montana, a woman walking down the street with her 2 teenage daughters who insisted for the camera, like, what are we talking about here? Why are we making a big deal out of it? Men grope women, so what? That's what teenagers do. That's just what happens. And she's nodding along. The kids are nodding along. The kids know that they're getting groped all the time, and they still don't care. So I don't know what to make of that for you, except to say that it's kind of pre-programmed into what it is to be female in this country and this culture, and I guess probably an awful lot of other countries and cultures around the world too. And I usually, like I said, I don't usually venture onto the territory of smashing the patriarchy, because that doesn't sound like it makes any sense coming out of my mouth, and I'm not at all versed in it, and I don't want to, I don't want to belittle the seriousness of the argument by doing a bad job of it, I guess, essentially. But it became very clear to me in reading through a lot of the articles, one of which we shared yesterday, others of which of the same kind came out, and maybe we can share some of those. And if I can remember for like 1 minute over this short break coming up that I want to discuss a certain angle of this with you, then I'll be able to deliver it and give you an explanation of what I'm talking about, because it's not going to be done in the 30 seconds that we have before we cut out for our break. But like I said, yesterday was a very revealing day, not only for more accusations about Kavanaugh or around Kavanaugh, but just for accusations about how much of this went on and just how much of what passes for the governing elite in this country come up through these ranks, and how important this kind of behavior actually is for determining who gets a place in those ranks. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I tried to keep this in mind over the space of the break. One other piece that I read that was very similar to the one we shared yesterday. And which one was it? I have to kind of flip back to the archives and be sure I have... where did we put this one? I feel like... did we read it on the air? I'm pretty sure that we did. And it's not becoming immediately apparent to me, but I can just skip on to the one I've got for you. But I thought there was an awful lot... there we are. Brett Kavanaugh and the cruelty of male bonding. Do you remember that one from the woman whose last name I wasn't sure of pronouncing correctly, Lily Loughborough, and her explanation about how in many of these cases, particularly those cases in which a man or boy, in the case of Kavanaugh and the others, acts out this way in front, but particularly in front of other male peers, as opposed to, say, for instance, I mean, it's something that differentiates in a way this Stephen Dalton Barrel story that we just read, which is it was a one-on-one situation and appears to have different qualities, not to mention the fact that it was, well, until the courts redefined it, it was a straight up, as people understand it to be, rape. There's no question about motivation or her motivation in any of this. She was walking home and he was walking with her and he picked her up and carried her back. I mean, it doesn't get any clearer than that, although he probably thought, how I should be able to get away with it. Probably, and by the way, there's no discussion of it from the article, but it probably was the case that they thought that he might possibly beat the rap. Why? Because they were coming from a bar. One, so she's drinking. So therefore, you know how this works. She's guilty. And two, well, she walked at least toward his home with him. She left the place with him willingly. And we have lots of witnesses that show that. And, I wonder if there isn't some sort of hybrid explanation here as between the sort of performative thing and the, and the I don't know what you would call it, the hidden side of it that actually develops into a rape about which you would ordinarily have no questions in defining it. But I bet that their first option in defense, if they were to go ahead with the trial, would be to bring witnesses to show that, one, that they knew one another, as if that doesn't happen, and two, that they left together, and that it was everyone's assumption that they left together willingly and for the purposes of having consensual sex. And even if that never entered into the mind of the victim, although, again, probably even here the defense attorney would say, well, did it really never enter your mind? You must have known what people would have thought about that. And that's the sort of, smearing that goes on of victims in rape cases. But I was wondering whether there's some crossover as between the performative for the male peer group thing and this sort of case. Just sort of wondering, totally speculative here, but wondering whether they were so sure that they had witnesses that would be willing to say in court that it looked consensual from their point of view, because there was knowing looks, winks, high fives, whatever, these guys might signal one another with as they were leaving the place that he gave to his male friends, just so that they would be sure to know that he was off to make a conquest, and they would note it mentally and put him in the right place in the pecking order as a result. This is what I mean when I'm saying, how much I learned yesterday about the reasons why men do some of these things and what they hope to get out of it, even if they don't, as was the case with Brett Kavanaugh's initial accuser here, Christine Blasey Ford, if they don't actually rape anyone, or at least this particular victim here. And that's, people are hanging their hat on that. Well, it's not a rape because this didn't happen. And okay, it's true. It's not, it's an attempted rape, but maybe he wasn't wholeheartedly attempting it because all he really wanted to do was get his friend Mark Judge's approval and have it be known around the party and therefore around their party circuit that, he was alone in the room with Christine, except Mark was there and he'll vouch for him. And, we were being manly men up there, even if we never actually went through with the rape or never really intended to attempt it in the first place. The important part was we shut the door behind her and got her to scream as though she was going to be raped. And that's what everybody needs to know. Seriously. Again, I would recommend to you that you take a look at that piece that we saw yesterday, Brett Kavanaugh and the cruelty of male bonding. Remember, it depends on there being cruelty here. It's a thing, apparently, among a certain kind of men and boys, in this case, that they be seen as tough and manly, and that is demonstrated by being callous to and careless of, well, not entirely careless of, the fears of women. Even if they don't make these so-called conquests, even if they don't commit these actual rapes, it would be a so-called conquest, but whether it's consensual or not, they need to have others see them as powerful and virile. Whether they ever really think they're going to go through with it and have any sort of sexual intercourse or not is almost irrelevant. So again, I would recommend this thing to you. And I told you I have a similar piece here. Gia Tolentino, is that correct? From the New Yorker. And I say is it correct? I'm just checking because one, I'm not sure if I pronounce it right. And two, I'm up against the New Yorker's paywall, which means I have to read it in pocket view, which means sometimes they just, for whatever reason, they'll give you the flat out wrong author in the pocket view. I've not really understood that, but I'm sure those of you who could explain it to me, those of you who would have the technical explanation, something to do with the way the publication builds its URLs and maybe a placeholder name was put in there or whatever. Not important. What is important, though, is what she has to say, which is here. One of the most notable qualities of the infamous Access Hollywood tape, leaked to the Washington Post a month before the 2016 presidential election, was the bizarre, awkward, three toddlers in a trench coat artificiality of Donald Trump's attempt to impress the TV host Billy Bush with an account of his sexual prowess. This is a great reminder and observation. I better use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her, Trump said. Do you remember this? This is a huge part of it. Everyone remembers, of course, the heavy hitting line of grab them by the pussy. If you're a star, they let you do it. You know the whole thing. But this is the part here that I find really interesting. He's not only is he admitting to, or not only does he want Billy Bush, which, by the way, why the F would you care about impressing Billy Bush with anything? But again, it's part of the male in-group thing, status thing, which is amazing. Which I guess brings me back to the other point I wanted to make, which I don't know whether I should save it for later or spit it out now. But in case I forget, this I won't forget. The article I won't forget because it's right here in front of me. Just pausing on that again for a second, demonstrating status, that cruelty to women, whether it's a real, an actual rape or an attempt or a fake attempt or whatever, just grabbing, groping, saying something cruel, putting something cruel in your yearbook, as he did with the Renata alumnus thing. It's a status symbol. And here, like I said, this is where we wander into a situation where I feel idiotic speaking to the idea of the patriarchy. But I mean, how else could you describe a situation in which it's a legitimate status symbol that you can use to rise to positions of real responsibility and honor in the United States? Public office, very important public office in the case of Kavanaugh, by telling other men who will likely have access to the levers of power themselves by virtue of their birth, by virtue of their wealth, by virtue of I don't know whatever, the school they're in, you pick it, you name it, it doesn't matter. But by telling them, yeah, I also don't care about the feelings of women, even if that's not true, they have to say that. I'm so callous about the way women feel about these things. Why, I'll show you. I'm so tough. I don't mind. Sometimes women will slap you, but I'm tougher than I can take that slap. And besides which, it makes me look manly. It's virile. I don't take no for an answer. Even if they do take no for an answer. Even if Kavanaugh was, for instance, a virgin all the way through high school and college and many years afterwards, as he claims, i.e., he's getting a lot of no. Whether he takes it for an answer or not, I couldn't tell you. But the no's, in terms of actually getting him into a long-term relationship, there seem to be standing in the way. It seems to be working sometimes. But, and it may be that he's the kind of person, and he probably views himself as the kind of person, if he's telling, well, he's not telling the truth about any of this, but if the accusers are telling the truth about everything, and there I have no reason to doubt it, even so, none of the accusers are saying that he went through with a rape, but he did do enough to demonstrate to other men that maybe he would be willing to do that, or maybe he didn't need to do that in front of them because he's so busy raping people all the time that it doesn't even matter anymore. It doesn't thrill him at this point, or he's having so much consensual sex that he need not resort to rape. He's just playing around. And it really struck me yesterday how the Kavanaugh case could be illustrative of the number of men who believe this way or grew up this way. And I also have very little doubt that people grow up with this thought in mind, and then they hit a certain age or they get serious about a woman that they are involved with and get serious enough to consider marrying them and starting a family, and they treat that woman entirely differently because that's for real and serious, and you can't be gaming around like that. They can't do, and also the guys aren't around. When it gets to the serious stage, of course, guys like this very frequently are very secretive about the way their relationship develops, and they take a lot of ribbing for it too from their friends. And you can imagine the scenes and the things that they say, but they go through with it anyway. But they get to a certain age where they're like, yeah, all of that stuff I used to think is stupid, or, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Or even Mark Judge admitting to one of his former girlfriends, who's now willing to talk to investigators, admitting ashamedly that he had been involved in this scene and done all these things, because he comes to an age where he realizes this was outrageous and can't be tolerated anymore. But in the meantime, they've risen to these ranks. It doesn't matter. It's too late. You can't revoke it. Even if you find out that there are people who are willing to go on the record and say what they did to them, you can't revoke it. And I'm thinking about how many men are in these positions of power. And by the way, as it happens for somebody like Brett Kavanaugh, in a position of power to decide about what is and isn't women's health, what are and aren't women's rights, what they can and can't do with their bodies now that he's done with them. That's pretty insulting. But all of this happens. He's in this position because he hurt women. Like, you could go to, now it's possible that you can go through all of this and go to the right schools and that will be enough. I mean, apparently to date, from what we know about Neil Gorsuch, he didn't engage in any of this. Although, by the way, I don't know if anybody's calling for reopening any investigations there. And right now, lots of folks, lots of Democrats and liberals and progressives are pointing to Gorsuch as a counterexample to the complaint from Republicans and conservatives that, oh, they'll just do this to anybody. If we let them get away with this on Kavanaugh, they'll just make up rape allegations about anybody that they don't like. Or some people went ahead and said, they always do. That's how we know they're going to continue doing it. And of course, people pointing out, gee whiz, it didn't happen to Neil Gorsuch. And he even went to Georgetown Prep. But I'm reading so many articles about how pervasive this was that maybe it's worth wondering whether Neil Gorsuch was involved in this culture. And there are ringleaders and there are hangers-on, to be sure. And Neil Gorsuch, of course, was politically connected enough, one, to end up in Georgetown Prep, and two, to assure himself of a place in the power structure later if he wanted it, not necessarily dependent on doing any of this stuff. But if you wanted, I'm sure, to be seen as one of the guys, one of the cool guys who deserved, quote unquote, to get a place in a great college afterwards, or be on the football team and hang with the cool kids at Georgetown Prep, you had to engage in this sort of performative nonsense, or worse, that Kavanaugh was involved in. And I like I said, I got to thinking about how many of the men who are in these positions of power, particularly positions of power over women's lives still, are there because they did this. They did enough of this sort of thing to get in with the in crowd, which means that, why, sure, the football player who graduates from Georgetown Prep and goes on to a career later on in business will hire you, or ask you to go in with him as a partner on the ground floor of his new, well, it wouldn't have happened back in for the kids of the 80s, but for later on, our new internet startup, I'll hire all my buds from high school or whatever. You know that jobs get traded this way all the time. Club memberships get traded this way all the time. How did Kavanaugh get into Congressional Country Club anyway? Why did he feel the need to pay a $100,000 initiation fee, knowing that that's more than half his yearly salary? I don't know where the money came from in the first place, but what a waste of money it is, except if you know how many deals and how much advancement is held out in, as a promise to those who join those clubs. I mean, I guess one last crack at illustrating this, if you have any doubt about it or any difficulty believing that this could possibly be the case. The adult version, when you cast away the nonsense of, well, I will performatively hurt women to prove my bona fides to my peer group, when you finally cast that aside and you become a responsible citizen and you've married and you have kids, and one, you would never treat your wife that way, and two, God help you, if you treat my daughter that way, I'll shoot you and bury you, that whole performative aspect. What do you substitute for it? It's still a club you were trying to get into by mistreating girls in high school. It just didn't have a $100,000 initiation fee, and the game, it wasn't golf. You just swap it for this. And you got to get into the right club. And when you're in the right club, you trade jobs and advancement opportunities and investment opportunities with the other people in it. And you play golf and you play competitively rather than attempt to rape people competitively, I guess. And by the way, afterwards, both before and afterwards, you're in the locker room, where, of course, the conversation turns to locker room talk, which I guess brings us back to the Access Hollywood tape, so I can read you the rest of this article. Just wanted to expand on things and tell you where I went yesterday in thinking about all these things. So one of the more notable qualities, she notes, of the infamous Access Hollywood tape was the bizarre, awkward, 3 toddlers in a trench coat artificiality of Donald Trump's attempt to impress the TV host Billy Bush with an account of his sexual prowess. I better use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her, Trump said. Did he really think that was going to happen? He just wanted Billy Bush to think, wow, this guy's wild and crazy and such sexual prowess, he may just start kissing her. Hang on for the ride. I got to see this. You know, in case you didn't believe me that I might start kissing her. You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. Just kiss. And then, of course, grab them by the pussy. You can do anything. Like the kissing wasn't really making it with Billy Bush or something. I just start kissing everybody. You don't start kissing everybody. Are you kidding me? I've been around you enough. I've interviewed you. You don't just start kissing people. Well, then I'll be cruder and throw out another possibility. And you've never seen me do this, but I did. You know, I could do anything. This conversation, quickly shoved by Trump and his campaign under the heading of locker room talk. What locker rooms? The golf club locker rooms. Because now they've put aside childish things and they are instead in the golf locker room and not in the football locker room. And but instead conversation turns to, remember that time I just totally pushed that girl into the room and locked the door and jumped on top of her? Yeah, I remember, because I was there. That's just the progression that this stuff makes. So this conversation, quickly shoved by Trump and his campaign under the heading of locker room talk, resembled other such man-to-man interactions that seem, on the surface, to be about sex with women, but are not really about sex or women at all. I thought about the tape this week when the Times published a story about the embattled Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh's high school yearbook. The phrase Renata alumnius appears on Kavanaugh's senior page, and there are, all told, at least 14 Renata references in the yearbook, the Times reported. That's pretty disgusting all by itself. A photo of Kavanaugh and 8 other football players is captioned Renata alumni. These phrases all refer, as the Times explained, to Renata Schroeder Dolphin, a woman who attended a nearby Catholic girls' school. 2 of Kavanaugh's former classmates told the Times that it was common for this group of guys to boast about their conquests, and that's in scare quotes. One said they were very disrespectful, at least verbally, with Renata when she wasn't around, I guess. Kavanaugh, because remember, if you don't remember the story, you didn't hear it the other day, Renata signed the letter. She was one of the supposedly 65 women who were vouching for Kavanaugh's character and how honorably he treated women and how honorably he behaved at all times. She had no idea this was going on. This was what was really happening. Kavanaugh, meanwhile, offered the denial of a squirming 9th grader in the principal's office. Basically, the reference on his senior page merely alludes to a wholesome kiss, he told the paper. Dolphin called her appearances in the yearbook horrible, hurtful, and simply untrue, and added that she and Kavanaugh never kissed. So, by the way, still to this day, in case you think he grew up, in case you think it didn't just morph into the same kind of locker room garbage at the country club that I just described, this is his current day denial of what that meant. Oh no, it was about a kiss. He's still signaling to his male peers that he got something off of Renata. In some ways, okay, it wasn't, so I didn't have sex with her, like I said. Big deal. It's been 35 years. Give me a break, guys. Stop ribbing me. At least, look, I gave her a kiss, and you know how kids are. I bragged about it. Big deal. You all did too. But he won't just say, you know we were all lying, right? In some ways, of course, it is ridiculous that we are talking about the 1983 Georgetown Prep yearbook at all. Barrel scraped, the editor of thenationalreview.com wrote on Twitter. I was the editor of my high school yearbook, and my friends and I stacked it with dozens of bad inside jokes, many of which surely highlighted various forms of adolescent cruelty. But then again, the contrast between the yearbook and the way that Kavanaugh speaks about his high school experience has accentuated the judge's reflexive inability to be candid about his own life. Although his senior page is littered with extremely recognizable teen dirtbag allusions, including 100 Kegs or Bust and Beach Week Ralph Club, Kavanaugh on Monday night appeared on Fox News and described the high school experience that, quote, focused on academics and athletics, going to church every Sunday at Little Flower, working on my service projects, and friendship, which is, of course, what you do when you're trying to lie your way onto the Supreme Court, but also what you do when you've supposedly grown up and you have a wife and she'll leave you if you're like, yeah, I was a serial rapist, maybe. But your kids, certainly, you don't want them to hear it. And you tell different stories about your background. And you even begin to believe them, I bet. So continuing here, the yearbook also helped to highlight a pattern in the pardon me, hang on a second. Wow, I've made the mistake of taking a sip of water to alleviate that problem, and it only made it worse. The yearbook helped to highlight a pattern in the 2 sexual misconduct allegations that have been lodged against him. Like that frog has lodged itself in my throat. Holy cow. As with Trump's spasmodic talk about tic tacs and magnets. Would you say spasmodic or spasmodic? Talk about tic tacs and magnets. The stories about Kavanaugh seem to show sex and sexual assault as something that men do for other men. Christine Blasey Ford, who attended the all-girls Holton Arms School while Kavanaugh attended the all-boys Georgetown Prep, has accused Kavanaugh of drunkenly corralling her into a bedroom at a high school party, and while a friend egged him on and both boys laughed, pushing her down onto the bed, trying to pull off her clothes, and covering her mouth to stop her from screaming. Deborah Ramirez, who attended Yale with Kavanaugh, has said that during, well, again, I've wandered into the description of things without warning you, but obviously almost any of these articles is going to have some description of these things. Deborah Ramirez, who attended Yale with Kavanaugh, has said that during a freshman year drinking game after one male student pointed a plastic penis at her. I had not heard that version of events either, and I guess you might wonder why there was a plastic penis around and what the guy was doing with it and who it belonged to and why they thought it was a good idea to take that out. But that was quickly eclipsed by Kavanaugh's one-upping him, I guess, basically. She doesn't say it that way, but that's clearly what's happening here, in my view. Kavanaugh dropped his pants, laughing, and put his penis, not the plastic one, in her face. Kavanaugh has said he, quote, never sexually assaulted anyone, unquote, and called Ramirez's accusation a smear, plain and simple. In each case, the other men, not the woman, seemed to be Kavanaugh's true intended audience. Lily Loughborough wrote at Slate, we read that, noting the jarring presence of laughter in both stories. If these allegations are true, Loughborough went on, one of the more shocking things about them is the extent to which the woman being mistreated exists in a room where the men are performing for each other. The woman, using the woman to firm up their own bond. Again, how much male advancement, how much of the ruling class of our country rules now and will rule for the foreseeable future because they hurt women, because how many of them built their careers on it. It got me to thinking about even the old saw that's not meant to be taken this way about how, behind every successful man is a good woman or a strong woman or what. I don't even know how they say it anymore. Now they probably say, someone probably tried to clean this up by saying, well, you're still keeping the woman behind, but if you say strong woman, then it's okay. I don't know. But, behind every successful man, something, a woman. And initially, I guess like the first timid steps toward acknowledging the role of women in society. Well, they're the ones that make men successful. Whatever. Take that for whatever it's worth. But I was thinking more along the lines of behind every successful man, and maybe not every successful man, okay, fine, but behind a lot of these successful men are women they hurt in order to become successful. There's a lot of male success built on women's backs, and you always knew that to be the case, even in the traditional sense of of wives supporting their ambitious husbands in their ambition. But here I'm not talking necessarily at all about anyone who ever became close to becoming at least that man's wife, but there's probably a lineup of a dozen or more women out there who may never have thought about him again in the intervening 3 decades, but to whom a lot of that success is owed. They'll get nothing for it. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show, and let's see if we can't, I probably scrolled to the wrong place here. Want to continue with the reading of the New Yorker piece from Gia Tolentino, and scattered in and out of this, my own commentary, which appears to, had I written it out, be longer than the actual article I was reading. But this is, I don't know, it's been eye-opening for me to take a look at these, which I guess is a good thing. That's why you're supposed to read these articles. Okay. So yeah, I was just sort of wondering about, how many women, and so many of those memories are buried. There's very little chance that women would even remember, or be willing, I guess, to remember some of these things. And I'm sure that, nobody thinks of these episodes in these terms, like I contributed somehow to the rise to success of this person. While it may be that they think of themselves as having been stepped on the way up, they don't really, and it's not like something I want people to like start now going out and trying to take credit for or anything. I'm just saying that it's an amazing observation, unstated in these articles, but pretty clearly outlined, that if this stuff is performative, it's aimed at shoring up a place in a certain social circle that will lead to, eventually morph into career success, responsible adult success. Just as the football locker room stuff evolves into golf club locker room stuff, but doesn't really necessarily change in nature, though it might mute itself in terms of its public performance, and it becomes a hidden performance instead, because you have spaces that you've paid for that you can perform in. I mean, I guess that's really it. You didn't do this sort of thing necessarily, certainly not to this extent, in class at Georgetown Prep, though a cruel remark would certainly be not out of place in class. But physical attacks probably happening in the only private spaces they had, each other's parents' homes whenever parents were away, or whatever homes they had access to for beach week. That's where the real craziness would go on. In adulthood, earning your own salary, you're able to pay for a membership in an exclusive golf club and move the bragging and activity and performance into that space instead, which, by the way, probably goes a long way towards explaining the continued existence up until very recently, and in some cases still today, all male golf clubs where the women can't join, or they can only join as associate members in conjunction with the husbands, etc. And I'll bet we didn't really we always thought about that in terms of, patriarchy and male chauvinism, etc. But I guess we didn't think about it yet in terms of, well, the reason is because they need to have a protected space where they continue to perform for one another and pretend or actually acknowledge that they're still out there raping people. But, now the parents' homes are either off access, off limits to them. Parents are gone. The home's gone. Parents are, I don't know, they're dead perhaps. So you got to rebuild that in someplace else. Anyway, I don't know. I'll continue on with the article rather than my own scattered thoughts. This is a common dynamic in fraternities. Again, I got to comment again. Another self-created space for this sort of performance. And, you know, the reason you tell your kids, when you're talking to your kids about stuff, and you tell them, well, why are you working hard in school? Why do you have to do your homework? You got to go to a good college. Go to a good college, you'll get a good job. Why? Well, because, you know, the flattest explanation for it is, people will see where your degree is from, and rightly or wrongly, they will make assumptions about that and hire based on that. And although they'll also want to know if you're skilled and personable, the elite schools, the name of an elite school, will open doors for you, even if it only opens doors for you because it's the school. I went there. You know, that's my school. And so it opens the door, even if it's not an elite school, or if it is an elite school, or there are assumptions about the actual education that goes on there or not. But I'll bet every once in a while when you say you're from, you know, someplace like Yale and you appear like you might be that kind of guy who moved in those circles, they might test the waters with you and find out whether you're one of theirs or not. But this sort of thing goes on. I guess the unspoken part, although sometimes I speak it aloud to my kids as they prepare to go on to college, is not only will the name of the university open doors for you if you speak to an alumnus, or if you're just speaking to somebody who knows and recognizes and values the brand, essentially, that elite school projects. But there's also the fact that it opens doors for everybody who's there. And it's going to open a door for somebody else in an unfair way, I'm sure. You'll know more people having gone to Yale who, for whatever reason, for good or for ill, because they deserve it or because they inherited it, will have access to money and the ability to help you start a career. And you'll know more of them from Yale than you will likely know certainly from a smaller school, certainly from a less famous school, than you would if you get into one of the elite schools. And it just puts you in, you know, even without any nefarious activity, it puts you in a position to succeed in a way that other schools don't. And on top of that, you would then add the fraternities, which do even more self-selecting in that sense. Now, it's one thing if you went to Yale. Lots of people went to Yale. Oh, you were a deek. I was a deek. And then you start talking about who you raped, I guess. This is a common dynamic in fraternities, and it has been a persistent one in the Yale chapter of Kavanaugh's fraternity, Delta Kappa Epsilon, or DKE, DKE, pronounced Deke. When Kavanaugh was a sophomore, the Yale Daily News ran a photograph of Deke pledges carrying a flag woven out of women's underwear. Actually got mentioned on the show, across campus. Kavanaugh did not appear in the picture, by the way. But just tells you what kind of folks they really are. In 2011, Deke received a 5-year suspension after its pledges yelled, you'll love this one. And again, watch out. Here it comes. It is radio. And the terminology is medical. I guess I can say it. They were suspended for 5 years after they had their pledges yelling, "No means yes," and "yes" means anal, in front of where were they? The Yale Women's Center. Why? Because they're trolling the Women's Center. Women's studies, that's stupid, conservative people like to say. I like Rush Limbaugh and cigars, and yes, I eat red meat all the time. You remember when that became popular? That was the 80s, right? When Rush Limbaugh, popularized basically smoking, drinking, and getting fat and clogging your arteries. Because I don't care, because PC, it's so stupid. I'm going to die early to own the libs. You know how this went. You were alive at the time. And so, steak, look, I like steak. It tastes good. It's not great for you. You eat it in moderation. Cigars, they're interesting, but I don't smoke them all the time, and they stink. And by the way, if you are actually interested in having a relationship with women, they usually don't love the cigars too much. But hey, I'm sure there's people who appreciate them. But the cigars and the drinking, and I liked drinking. That's fun. But you can't rape people when you're drunk. That's don't do that. Anyway, the point is here that it was all of a piece. They were going to go and troll the women's center because that was a manly thing to do. I don't even care. Don't you think you'll be like, how will you get a girlfriend if you are seen in front of the Yale Women's Center trolling them? And think about the mindset. Well, first of all, I don't care. Second of all, if I want a woman, I'll club her over the head and drag her back to my cave. And also, I'm just kidding. There's always that. And, but on the other hand, there's also the mindset of, let's say, a guy who, attended, at least for a while, an Ivy League school and rose in the ranks to, say, become president of the United States. Let's just imagine such a person who then says about women, the way to success, as he learned it in his circles, in his clubhouses, in his locker rooms, was to treat them like S, as they say, because we're pretending we're on the radio here. The S word. Treat them like crap. That's how you, and I mean, in varying degrees, there's some people who actually sort of legitimately think that, and some people who just do it performatively or whatever. I mean, think about that, right? It's performative for Donald Trump too, just the same way. How do you get women? You treat them like crap. Now, the people, the pickup artists who are at the heart of the men's rights stuff and the incel alt-right weirdos, etc., and the other various pickup artists who preceded them, like to say that all the time. Treat them like crap. And I don't know what their thinking is here, but I guess they always sold it as, the idea, the innocent-ish idea behind it was, you don't want to look too overeager and too interested. And that's somehow a turnoff to all women. They all react to the same things the same way, apparently. And you got to show a certain indifference or something. I don't know why that was supposed to be good advice, but it's what they told you. But so you have Donald Trump though taking that to the extreme. Well, you treat him like crap, and then they'll like you. Now, of course, he is a sort of a special case in that he always gave the illusion anyway of having lots of money, and there are people, men and women, who are just attracted to money and nothing else, and that would probably lead me to be annoyed with people and want to treat them like crap if I thought they were always after my money. But he likes them to be after his money. He's into that. And it's part of the act. Like, I'll treat you like crap. And if you continue to express an interest in me, then I'll know that it's really about the money and I'll know how to deal with you. I'll have sex with you and attempt to pay you off. Then if I know that you're after the money, then I know I can buy the sex I need from you. That might be his approach, but also just to harken back to the Access Hollywood thing. On the one hand, treat him like crap, grab him by the pussy, right? On the other hand, what does he say? What does he say to Billy Bush in the less publicized or the less interesting, apparently, parts of the Access Hollywood tapes? He's talking about this other woman that he's trying to woo here. And what did he say he did to try to get her? I remember, what was it? I moved on her like a bitch, but I couldn't get there. Well, treat him like crap, right? You mean you were trying to have sex with her, so you treated her like crap, but it didn't work? No, he took her furniture shopping. How is that treating her like crap? I mean, it is, because it's like, oh my God, I have to spend time with Donald Trump. That's being treated like crap. That's true. But, it's not most people's definition. Held up against, say, the example of Brett Kavanaugh, I think Christine Blasey Ford probably would have opted for the furniture shopping even if she didn't need anything. It's a better option. But it's interesting that when he's trying to be the cool guy, he tells his first instinct is to tell Billy Bush, treat him like crap, grab him by the pussy, do whatever you want. I just start kissing him like a magnet. If you're a star, they let you do it. Really? Wow, that sounds pretty hot. Hey, what'd you do with that other chick you were just talking about? Oh, I moved on her like a bitch. Yeah. What was your move? I took her furniture shopping. That doesn't seem like true. No rebuttal. I mean, I'm sure he's just like, he may have burst out laughing, but I mean, the idea of, well, wait a second. How is that treating them like crap? It doesn't matter. There's no logic to this. Just go along with it. It's Donald Trump. No one knows what the F he's talking about. But anyway. You can see that this is performative, especially even for him, and for this too. I mean, and this is a joke that they got off of somebody somewhere. And, there the performative part is, again, show that you don't care about the feelings of women. Now, if you ever happen to get a girlfriend and she says, well, aren't you a Deke? Yeah. I saw you. I mean, you're a Deke pledge. You and I are the same year. I know you must have pledged the same year. All the pledges had to do this. You must have been out front of the Yale Women's Center yelling that no means yes thing, right? Oh, yeah, they made us do that. I don't, it was just a joke. And, well, I take it very seriously. And if he's really genuinely interested in her, it becomes apologetic. You know how it is with the pledges. And, well, no, I don't know how it is. Why was it so important for you to be a member of this fraternity that you would say something so horrible? It leads to success later in life. He could actually probably explain it. And he might even be able to explain it in a way that makes her say, oh, I can see that there's so much more to you than what that incident brought out in you, but it's almost like you're a victim here too, and maybe I'll fix you. Oh, God, we get into that narrative too. But why would they choose to do this? Because it's callous, because it will be viewed as hurtful to women, and they know that Deeks will get a kick out of that, and so will other fraternities. Those guys, even the geeky fraternities will be like, some people will say, well, that was horrible. We don't endorse that. And others will say, I wish I had the balls to do that. And I don't know why you would wish such a thing, but people do. And it's because I think those guys in the geek fraternities are working their asses off to become, let's say the next Bill Gates in the world. But they know that in order to launch their whatever it is that they think is going to make them the next Bill Gates in the world, they're going to need venture capital money. And that means the a-holes from Deke are going to have to like us. I'm going to have to go in there and pitch. When I go and pitch my app, I'm going to have to be performative for them. And if it is all men in the room, I probably want to talk about how I like Tic Tacs and I'm a magnet and I automatically kiss people or take them furniture shopping. So this is what happened. They bring their pledges out to shout this stuff in front of the Yale Women's Center, which they could have yelled anywhere because that's offensive to everyone. So yell it in the library, but instead Yale Women's Center. Why? Because there's a women's center and they want to have a safe space. I hate this. It's so PC. It's crap. I'm going to go interrupt them and their women's studies by yelling outside. The fraternity's 2016 and 17 president, to return to our article, was suspended after the school found that he had engaged in penetration without consent, which we call rape, but in college disciplinary hearings, they got to have a different word for it. Because if you just say that the president of the fraternity raped somebody, you have to expel him. But he's suspended because penetration without consent. 2016. In a statement to the Yale Daily News, he denied many of the claims made in the complaint filed against him, by the way. Fraternities attract men who value other men more than women. Nicholas Syrett, S-Y-R-E-T-T, writes in his History of White Fraternities, The Company He Keeps, published in 2009. The intimacy that develops within fraternal circles between men who care for each other, and that's a nice thing, necessitates a vigorous performance of heterosexuality in order to combat the appearance of homosexuality. Because that's bad, okay? I guess that's what they're thinking. Essentially, men who enjoy one another's company and care about each other, who get together and live together and engage in social activity together, all of a sudden panic that might be seen as gay. Don't worry about it. Bert and Ernie, just a small fraternity, by the way, in case you were wondering. That was in the news just the other day, too. All right. I belonged, our author says, to a sorority at the University of Virginia. My partner of 9 years was in a UVA frat, and I was taught coming up in the 80s, in the same era, that frat was an unacceptable abbreviation, and I always learned to say fraternity, and there's a dumb reason why, and I don't need to share it with you, but I just found that interesting. I think that's a colloquialism. Maybe it was only unique to our campus or something, but we didn't say frat. I spent a not insignificant amount of my freshman year going to Deke parties. Our author says, on a recent revisiting of my old journals, I came across an entry in which I happily recount blacking out after consuming a large bottle of strawberry daiquiri flavored Boone's Farm at the Deeks of Hazard country-themed soiree. Not something that would be unfamiliar to a lot of people. I don't know why everybody's concentrating on the 80s, but I agree it happened in the 80s. I can't believe that it didn't happen at other times either. Maybe it was that it's the last point at which this was as widespread as it was, because it was the transition of drinking age from 18 to 21 and the beginning of college crackdowns through insurance, by the way. That was my experience, was that the college's insurance carriers made it plain, hey, look, we can't cover you for liability if you guys aren't going to enforce laws about drinking. If you're going to let the underage students drink without cracking down on it, and there's a claim, we're not going to cover you. And insurance was what leveraged that change in the drinking culture. I mean, drinking culture still persists, to be sure, at college. It's just done slightly differently. It was the last of the anything goes decades, I think. Maybe that's why the concentration on it, not just because of the Kavanaugh story. Everybody else's stories seem to be focusing on the 80s as well. And by the way, that's a hint for those of you more interested in the gun violence issue than perhaps what we've been covering for the last week. Those of you who have always suspected that insurance carriers could make a difference in that. The dynamic in which men denigrate others to gain male approval can be relatively harmless if the person being clowned is a man who is framed as a rival and equal. Frat boys set off fire extinguishers in one another's rooms and dump spaghetti in one another's shower drains, and this, in the grand scheme of things, is funny and good and fine. But women are not equals in the eyes of the Greek system. Among other things, the system generally prohibits sororities from throwing their own parties with alcohol. By the way, did you know that? And so sororities rely on fraternities to provide booze, and they frequently become a casualty of this dynamic. I hope this has been brought to an end. I mean, it's ironic that you would be able to somehow undo some part of rape culture by saying, okay, sororities can buy alcohol too. No, we should be having less alcohol. Well, true, but maybe we can't prevent that from happening. So the next best thing is to say, hey, you should be empowered to get your own alcohol in your own safe spaces, and then you won't have to go into their safe spaces to become unsafe if you want to get that alcohol. But a huge thing. And that's true. I mean, that's a huge holdover from the old days. Well, that's not ladylike, you see. Anyway, in college, fraternity costume parties, engineered to encourage women to dress as sluttily as possible, felt to me as distant from actual sex as Trump's remarks about Tic Tacs. Men seemed to be getting women to doll themselves up as tennis hoes to their golf pros. What a dumb theme that is. Just to prove that they could. And they can. It was common in some frat houses to deliver a collective slow clap to the girls who sneaked out the morning after a party. As Siret writes, fraternities implicitly frame sex with women as something engaged in for one's brothers, for communal consumption with them. Women's bodies became the tools with which men perform intimacy and solidarity with one another. At least at first glance, women are not potential partners so much as potential means for upholding male self-interest. Under these conditions, the lines between boorishness and sexual assault are quickly blurred and easily crossed. Historically, Siret explains, white fraternities, there is a big difference there, have served to solidify elite male power and entitlement. In the 19th century, wealthy men separated themselves from their poorer classmates through the Greek system. In the 20th century, men used frat houses to preserve an exclusively male space in an increasingly mixed-gender world. Of course, fraternities are not the only institutions like this. They are not the only structures that attract men who value other men more than women, that allow their members to serve elite interests at the expense of a more just and equal society. On Thursday, a man who has been accused of sexual misconduct by 2 women and who has been nominated for a position to the Supreme Court by a president accused of sexual misconduct by 20 women will attempt to persuade 11 Republican men that he deserves that position, a position that would give him the authority to help decide, among other things, what options are available to women if they get pregnant after being sexually assaulted. What more damning demonstration of the solidification of male entitlement could we possibly get? Part of the reason the Kavanaugh news cycle has been such a flashpoint, part of the reason that so many conservatives have fanatically defended his right to have hypothetically committed the crime he's being accused of, and that so many women have been spending the last 2 weeks in a haze of resurfaced trauma, is that it illuminates the centrality of sexual assault in the matrix of male power in America. In high schools, in colleges, at law schools, and in the halls of Washington, men perform for one another to ascend to positions of power. Watching it happen is a deadening reminder for victims of sexual assault and harassment that in many cases you were about as meaningful as a chess piece, one of a long procession of objects in the lifelong game that men play with, I'll add, only other men. Pretty amazing and pretty true and pretty revealing, and I'm glad we got the chance to share it, and I got a chance to spill some of my own thoughts on there. Let's see. Thankfully, it is only Thursday. Hooray! So that means we have Friday to come. We'll be analyzing, I'm sure, what happened today in the hearing and tomorrow's show. And in the meantime, I have just a few minutes before wrapping things up here. No chance I'm going to get an update on what happened in the hearing in short enough time to hand it over to you. So instead, I will take Kate Sherrill's advice here and take a look at this must read. And it couldn't come more highly recommended. Kate Sherrill tweeting a Daniel Dale tweet here saying, Michael Lewis has quite an account of Trump's presidential transition, a Guardian story, which runs under the headline, This Guy Doesn't Know Anything, the inside story of Trump's shambolic transition team. And I really should read the whole thing because I've always suspected that he was stealing the money from the transition. And guess what? He suspects that other people are stealing the money. Check out this excerpt that Daniel Dale has chosen. The first time Trump paid attention to any of this, and I'm not sure what this is, but maybe this will reveal it, was when he read about it in the newspaper. The story revealed that Trump's very own transition team had raised several $1 million to pay the staff. Here we go. The moment he saw it, Trump called Steve Bannon, the chief executive of his campaign, from his office on the 26th floor of Trump Tower and told him to come immediately to his residence, many floors above. Oh no. Elevator. Bannon stepped off the elevator to find Chris Christie, I guess, seated on the sofa, being hollered at. Trump was apoplectic, yelling, You're stealing my money! You're stealing my effing money! What the F is this? Interesting. Seeing Bannon, Trump turned on him and screamed, Why are you letting him steal my effing money? It's not your money, you dummy. But that's the way he feels about it. All money is his money. Bannon and Christie together set out to explain to Trump federal law. Months before the election, the law said the nominees of the two major parties were expected to prepare to take control of the government. The government supplied them with office space in downtown D.C., along with computers and rubbish bins and so on, but the campaigns paid their people. To which Trump replied, F the law. I don't give an F about the law. I want my effing money. Wow. Bannon and Christie tried to explain that Trump couldn't have both his money and a transition. Shut it down, Trump said. Shut down the transition. Here, Christie and Bannon parted ways. Neither thought it was a good idea to shut down the transition, but each had his own misgivings. Christie thought that Trump had little chance of running the government without a formal transition, or getting arrested. Bannon wasn't so sure if Trump would ever get his mind around running the federal government. He just thought it would look bad if Trump didn't at least seem to prepare. Seeing that Trump wasn't listening to Christie, he said, What do you think Morning Joe will say if you shut down your transition? What Morning Joe would say, or at least what Bannon thought it would say, was that Trump was closing his presidential transition office because he didn't think he had any chance of being president. Trump stopped hollering. For the first time, he seemed to have listened. That makes sense, he said. Why are you effing you? You're a thief. You scumbag. How dare you? Well, here's a reason. Oh, that makes sense. Never I shouldn't have yelled at you and said that you were a moron and you were effing stealing my money. This is interesting because it comes pre-election. I don't know if we've ever discussed the fact, and I don't think it really even dawned on me until I don't know when. Not this article, but slightly earlier than this, that both presidential campaigns do set up transition offices before there is an election, just in case, because it takes an awful long time. You can't just start it from scratch, although it always looks like they're just starting from scratch. An important point. Maybe we can catch up on this and read the Guardian article tomorrow to get a fuller view of all of this. And there's a million other things that we should get to, but I know we'll be talking about the Kavanaugh hearings. I got to go check them out. You got to go check them out. In the meantime, if you don't want to check them out, you don't have to. I shouldn't say you have to. You can always, as a matter of fact, I recommend that you do, stick around for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next with Justice Putnam, because I spent all my time on Kavanaugh selfishly. I'm just trying to balance things here, both sides. He's selfish, I got to be selfish too. But Justice isn't, and he'll update you on more stories than just Kavanaugh. For instance, let's see, Trump didn't really like being asked why he always chose men over women, apparently, from yesterday's crazy-ass presser that we didn't even get to. And then, let's see, Trump's EPA makes a sneaky move to hamstring its Children's Health Office.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Man, we are so far behind on this, but thank God Justice has got these stories for you if you need an update right away. Mueller has evidence that Eric Prince's meeting in the Seychelles was actually prearranged to set up a back channel between the Trump administration and Russia, and Devin Nunes is now convinced Trump is part of a deep state conspiracy against Trump. Figure that one out.